Chapter 9 from the KESO Intermediate Accounting Book, and we're going to be looking at additional inventory issues. First, use of lower of cost or market, and this would be part 1 of 2 parts for Chapter 9. Loss of inventory value. Well, what does happen is that when you have something like what we call the net realizable value, which is the estimated selling price of an item in inventory, less reasonably predictable costs of completion, disposal, and transportation, we're going to use this when the sales price goes below the original cost. This approach begins with replacement cost, but first we have to figure out what that is, so we have to apply 2 additional limitations to valuing ending inventory. First, we have what we call the ceiling, which is the net realizable value, which I just discussed. And the floor is the net realizable value less a normal profit margin. A company values inventory at the lower of cost or market, with market limited to an amount that is not more than net realizable value or less than net realizable value less a normal profit margin. So, what does that look like if we were to do the chart? Well, here we go. So, what we have to do is compare cost, what we paid for it, and market. But to come up with market, we first have to look at replacement cost and does it fall within the range. If replacement cost is higher than the ceiling, then we have to use the ceiling. If replacement cost is lower than the floor, then we have to use the floor. If replacement cost falls in between, we use replacement cost. So now let's take a look at an example as to what that means. Here is our example. What we have items, we have quantities, we have what we paid for them, then we have what would it cost to replace them. We have the estimated selling price, we have the cost of disposal per unit, and then we have the normal profit margin per unit. So the first thing we need to do is to look at what is our floor and what is our ceiling. We have to calculate that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, okay, the selling price, I was having a little problem there. Selling price, we would start with that at the beginning. And we're going to subtract the disposal cost, and that tells us this is our ceiling. That means that when we look at what we're going to value the inventory or use market value, we know that it cannot be for item A more than $9. Now we're going to establish the floor, which is we're going to take less profit, which means that whatever it is, it can't be lower than, for item A, $7.20. Now what we can do is, again, replacement cost must fall within the range of net realizable value ceiling and net realizable value minus profit, which is the floor. So for the first one, $9 can't be higher than 9, and it can't be less than $7.20 to come up with market value. So now let's take a look at our example. So we have put the replacement cost in the middle in blue. So let's take a look at A. So when we look at A, we notice that the $8.40 falls within the $9 ceiling and $7.20 minute floor. So that would be our designated market. Now we'll go to the next one. The $7.90 again falls between the $8.50 ceiling, $7.50 floor, so that would be the designated market. For C, the $5.47 replacement cost falls below the floor, so we must use the $5.45. For the next one, for D, the $4.20 falls within the range, which means we'd use the $4.20. And then for E, the $6.30 is too high, so we'd have to use the ceiling. Now we have our designated market, and the next thing we're going to do is compare this to what we paid for it. And whichever is lower, whichever is high, let's see. Oh my gosh, it's totally left me. Whichever is lower is the one we're going to use to value our inventory. All right, so we've got our designated market or cost. So for the first one, we'd make no change because our designated market is higher than our cost and we don't write up inventory. For B, our cost is too high, so we'd use the $7.90. For C, our costs are too high, we'd use the $5.45. For D, our designated market is too high, so we just keep it at cost. And for E, our designated market would be the number because the cost is too high. So now we can figure out what kind of adjustment would we have to make. The lower of cost or market would be these items, these numbers, and then we would take that less what they cost, and it would tell us how much we're going to have to write off. And then we're going to take that times the units, and that tells us we're going to have to write off a total of $950. Now, accounting for inventory loss, there's two ways that you can do this based on the example that we just went through. One way we can do it is just use the loss method, or we could use the cost of goods sold method. The cost of goods sold method, when we use that method, what we're going to do with our $950 is we're going to debit cost of goods sold and credit inventory, and it would not be shown as a separate line item on the income statement. If we use the loss method, we're going to debit an account called loss on decline in inventory, and this would be a line item as part of other on the income statement. So I want to show you what those journal entries are going to look like. So if we take the write down to cost of goods sold, it's going to be cost of goods sold $950 and allowance to reduce inventory to market. If we decide instead to show it as other, we're going to do loss due to market decline of inventory and allowance to reduce inventory to market. So that's how part 1 of Chapter 9.